Rancher gave his jacket to a cold native. Next day, 200 warriors lined up at his fence. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into the story. In the rugged expanse of the American West, there was a rancher named Thomas, known for his hard work and quiet, solitary life. His ranch lay at the edge of a small town, surrounded by endless plains and towering mountains. The winters were harsh, the cold biting to the bone, and the winds seemed to sweep across the land without mercy. One frigid evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a muted shade of gray, Thomas was finishing his chores for the day. He had just finished feeding his cattle and was heading back to his modest cabin, eager to warm up by the fire. As he walked, he noticed a figure in the distance, barely visible against the twilight. At first, he thought it was just a shadow, perhaps a stray animal or the wind playing tricks on him. But as he approached, he realized it was a person, an individual struggling against the fierce cold. The person was a native man, hunched over and moving slowly, his steps faltering with each painful movement. His face was pale, lips cracked from the harsh winds, and his clothes were thin, offering little protection against the frigid temperatures. Without hesitation, Thomas rushed toward him, his boots crunching in the snow. "You there? Are you all right?" he called out, his voice carrying over the howling wind. The man looked up, his eyes wide with surprise, but there was no recognition in them. He staggered forward, almost falling into Thomas's arms. Thomas caught him just in time, steadying the man. The native man's teeth chattered, and he could barely speak, but he nodded weakly. Thomas, seeing the man's distress, acted quickly. "Here, take this," he said, removing his heavy woolen jacket and draping it over the man's shoulders. The warmth of the jacket seemed to bring some relief, and the man's breathing steadied. Thomas helped him to his feet, guiding him toward the cabin. "Come on, we'll get you inside and get you warm." They moved slowly, with Thomas supporting the man, his own heart pounding with concern. They reached the cabin, where Thomas quickly stoked the fire, and the two of them sat in the warmth of the hearth. The man, now wrapped in a blanket, sat quietly, his eyes glistening with gratitude. The air was thick with silence, save for the crackling of the fire. After a few moments, Thomas, ever the quiet type, simply said, "Rest here tonight. You're safe." The native man nodded again, this time his eyes full of a silent appreciation. As the night wore on, the storm outside only seemed to grow worse, the wind howling and the snow falling heavier. But inside the cabin, there was warmth and a quiet understanding between the two men, an unspoken bond formed in the midst of a brutal winter storm. Thomas, though used to solitude, felt something stir within him, perhaps a recognition of the fragile lives that existed in this harsh, unforgiving land. He never could have imagined that one small act of kindness, giving his jacket to a cold, suffering stranger, would lead to something far greater. But as he sat by the fire, his thoughts drifting, he had no idea that the next morning, his life would change forever, for 200 warriors would soon arrive at his door, bringing with them a debt of gratitude he could never have expected. The night passed slowly. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows on the walls of the small cabin. Thomas sat in his chair, his eyes drifting to the man now resting on the couch, wrapped in a thick blanket. The storm raged outside, the wind howling and the snow continuing to fall in heavy sheets. Thomas couldn't help but wonder who this man was and why he had been out there in the storm, alone and freezing. The man hadn't spoken much since they entered the cabin, but his eyes were filled with gratitude, and that was enough for Thomas. He had done what anyone would do, helping a person in need. But little did he know, his simple act of kindness would soon set into motion a chain of events that he couldn't have predicted. The next morning, Thomas woke to the sound of a heavy knock on his cabin door. He wasn't expecting any visitors, especially not after the storm that had kept the whole town shut in. He quickly rose from his bed and pulled on his boots, wondering who could be at his door. When he opened it, he was met with a sight that made his heart race. Outside, in the snow-covered yard, stood a group of men, about a dozen, maybe more. They were dressed in traditional native attire, their faces painted with intricate designs. Their eyes were serious, almost calculating, as they stood in perfect formation. Thomas stood frozen, unsure of what to do or say. He had no idea who they were or what they wanted. One of the men, a tall figure with a commanding presence, stepped forward. He was older than the rest, his hair long and gray, and his posture firm as he approached Thomas. The other men stayed silent, waiting. "I am Chief Tahoma," the man said in a deep voice, his accent thick but clear. "We have come to thank you for your kindness." Thomas blinked, still in shock. "Thank me?" he repeated, confused. "I don't understand." Chief Tahoma nodded, his eyes sharp. "You helped one of our own yesterday. You gave him your jacket and saved his life. That is a debt that cannot be ignored." Thomas shook his head, still unsure. "I was just helping a man in need. It was no big deal." The chief's expression softened slightly, though there was still a solemn weight to his words. "It is a big deal," he said. "To us, your kindness means more than you know. We owe you a debt, and we will repay it." Before Thomas could respond, the rest of the group stepped forward, one by one, until they had surrounded him. Their eyes were full of respect, and in their hands, they carried gifts, items made from bone, wood, and leather. The chief gestured to them. "These are offerings from my people. We have much to give, and we want you to know how much we appreciate your generosity." Thomas was stunned. He had never expected anything like this. "I didn't do it for any reward," he said, his voice quiet. The chief smiled slightly. "We understand, but this is how we show our respect. In our tradition, when someone does something honorable, we return that honor. You are now considered a friend of the tribe, and we will protect you as such." Just then, Thomas noticed something in the distance. In the far horizon, he could see more figures moving across the snow. As they drew closer, the shape of hundreds of men became clearer, warriors, all coming toward him. His heart skipped a beat. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice trembling. The chief glanced over his shoulder and then back at Thomas. "Those are our warriors. They are here to show their respect and offer their protection. You have earned it." Thomas's mind was spinning. Just the night before, he had been helping a cold stranger, and now, there were hundreds of warriors standing at his doorstep, ready to protect him. It felt like a dream, too surreal to be real. "I don't understand," Thomas whispered, still trying to process everything. Chief Tahoma's gaze softened. "You helped one of our own. That simple act has bound you to us, and we will not forget it. We will stand by you, and you will never be alone in this land again." As the warriors began to line up at the edge of his property, their eyes never leaving him, Thomas felt something shift inside him. He had always been a solitary man, living alone on his ranch, but now he was surrounded by people, by warriors, by a tribe that saw him as one of their own. And as the snow continued to fall, Thomas realized that his life would never be the same again. His simple act of kindness had opened a door to something far greater than he could have ever imagined. The warriors, with their silent strength and their unspoken bond, would remain by his side from that day forward, protecting him and honoring the kindness that had been shown to one of their own. The next few days passed in a haze of disbelief for Thomas. He had always been a man of simplicity, living on his ranch, focused on his cattle and the land he cared for. Now, however, things were changing, and fast. The warriors who had arrived with the chief were not just visitors. They were a presence, a force that seemed to fill the air around him. Every day, more of them arrived, their silent, watchful eyes never leaving his land. Thomas had never seen so many people, and certainly not people who had come to offer him such unwavering loyalty. It was overwhelming. Despite their silence, the warriors carried themselves with a calm dignity, moving through his land with ease. They didn't ask for anything. They simply stayed, guarding his property, ensuring that no harm would come to him. Chief Tahoma had made it clear that Thomas was now part of their tribe, their bond sealed by a simple act of kindness. At first, Thomas was unsure how to react. He had helped a man in need, but now it felt like he was part of something much bigger than himself. The weight of it all was heavy, and though the warriors never asked anything of him, he couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility. On the fourth morning after the warriors arrived, as Thomas was finishing his breakfast, Chief Tahoma approached him with a solemn look in his eyes. "Thomas," the chief began, his deep voice carrying a seriousness Thomas had never heard before. There are forces at work in this land that threaten us all. A group of men from a nearby settlement have been encroaching on our territory, and their actions are becoming more aggressive. We cannot allow them to continue. Thomas looked at the chief, his brow furrowed. "What do you need from me?" he asked, not sure what he was getting himself into. The chief's gaze hardened. "We need your help," he said. "Your ranch lies at the edge of the territory, and it is an ideal location to establish a stronghold. If you will stand with us, we can defend this land together. We can protect not only your home, but the homes of everyone in our tribe." Thomas took a long, deep breath. This was more than he had ever imagined when he first helped that cold, struggling man days ago. He had simply wanted to do the right thing, but now, it seemed, he had been called upon to do more. Still, there was something within him that stirred at the thought of standing with these warriors. He had spent years alone, and now, for the first time, he felt a connection, a sense of purpose. "I will help," he said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Chief Tahoma nodded, his face softening just a little. "You have made the right choice. Together, we will make sure that this land remains ours." Later that day, Thomas stood on the edge of his property, watching as the warriors made their preparations. They moved with a sense of purpose, their skills honed from years of survival in the harsh wilderness. The quiet power they exuded was both humbling and inspiring. For the first time, Thomas felt like he was part of something important. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the cold of the evening settled in, Thomas and the chief sat by the fire. The warriors were still out, scouting the area, preparing for the battle that loomed on the horizon. The chief turned to Thomas, his eyes full of respect. "You have shown courage," he said, "and that courage will serve us all." Thomas nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. He had no illusions about what was at stake. There would be bloodshed, and the battle ahead would be hard. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. He had a purpose, a reason to stand tall. And as he sat there, by the fire, surrounded by his new allies, he knew one thing for certain. His life had changed forever. The kindness he had shown to one man had led to something far greater than he could have ever imagined. And as the night grew darker, the sound of warriors moving through the land echoed in his mind. Tomorrow, they would defend what was theirs. And Thomas would stand with them, a part of something larger than himself. The morning light broke over the hills, casting a soft glow across the land. Thomas stood at the edge of his property, his eyes scanning the horizon. The night had passed without incident, but he knew that the battle was coming. The warriors had been preparing all night, sharpening their weapons and gathering supplies, readying themselves for what they knew would be a difficult fight. It was no longer just about helping a stranger. It was about defending the land, defending his home, and standing with the tribe that had shown him more respect and loyalty than he had ever known. As the sun rose higher, Thomas felt a mix of emotions. He was anxious, unsure of what the day would bring, but there was also a sense of purpose within him. He had chosen to stand with the warriors, and now, it was time to follow through. Chief Tahoma approached him, his expression as serious as ever. "Today, we fight," the chief said, his voice steady and full of resolve. "We will defend our land, and we will defend you, Thomas. You are one of us now." Thomas nodded, his heart swelling with pride. He had never felt like he belonged anywhere, but now, standing beside these warriors, he felt a sense of camaraderie that he had never experienced before. The warriors gathered around the chief, and they set off toward the front lines. Thomas, though not a trained fighter like the others, followed closely behind. He had never been in a battle before, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let these people down. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the warriors moved in formation, their presence strong and unwavering. Thomas couldn't help but marvel at their discipline, their unity. Each warrior knew his place, and they all moved as one, their eyes focused on the task ahead. They reached the edge of the settlement, where the enemy had gathered. A group of men, rough and disorganized, stood in a loose formation, their weapons raised in anticipation. They were outnumbered, but their aggression was palpable, their faces twisted in anger and hatred. Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. He had no experience with violence, but he had no doubt that these men would stop at nothing to take what they wanted. Chief Tahoma signaled for the warriors to halt. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas could feel the tension building in the air, the anticipation of the conflict that was about to unfold. "We will not fight out of anger," the chief said, his voice carrying over the stillness. "We fight to protect our land, our people, and our honor. Remember that." The warriors nodded in unison, their faces hardening with resolve. With a swift command, the battle began. Arrows flew through the air, and the clash of weapons rang out across the field. Thomas's heart raced as he watched the warriors move with precision, their training evident in every move they made. The enemy was disorganized, unprepared for the disciplined force they were up against. Thomas found himself in the thick of it, his heart pounding in his chest. His hand instinctively reached for a rifle that had been left by one of the fallen enemies, and for the first time in his life, he felt the weight of a weapon in his hands. It wasn't a fight he had ever wanted, but in that moment, it felt like the only choice. As the battle raged on, Thomas realized something that would stay with him forever. It wasn't the fight itself that mattered. It was the people he was fighting for. He had seen the warriors fight with such conviction, such pride in their land, and it was that pride that had inspired him to stand beside them. They weren't just defending their home. They were defending the very essence of who they were. As the day wore on, the enemy began to retreat, their morale shattered by the unwavering strength of the warriors. The ground was littered with the fallen, both enemy and ally alike, but the battle was over. The warriors had won. Thomas stood, panting, his heart still racing as the dust settled around him. The warriors began to regroup, their leader, Chief Tahoma, walking toward him. "You fought well today," the chief said, his voice filled with respect. "You have proven yourself not only to us, but to yourself as well." Thomas felt a rush of pride wash over him. He had fought not as a rancher, not as an outsider, but as one of them. He had earned their respect, and in doing so, had earned his place among them. That night, as the warriors celebrated their victory, Thomas sat by the fire, his heart full. He had come to this land as a man alone, but now, he was part of something much bigger than himself. He had found a family, and more importantly, he had found a purpose. The storm had passed, but the bonds that had been forged in its wake would last a lifetime. Days turned into weeks, and life on the ranch began to settle into a new rhythm for Thomas. The victory over the enemy had been a turning point, not only for the warriors, but also for Thomas. The respect he had earned from the tribe, from the warriors who had fought beside him, now felt like a permanent fixture in his life. The warriors stayed, continuing to protect the land, but Thomas no longer felt like an outsider. He was part of something larger, a family bound by loyalty and shared purpose. His days were filled with new challenges, from learning the ways of the tribe to helping maintain the peace that had been so hard won. He spent his mornings alongside the warriors, practicing new skills, learning their traditions, and understanding their culture. In the afternoons, he tended to his ranch, but now, it was not just his ranch. It was a place of unity, a symbol of the bond between him and the tribe. As the weeks passed, the connection between Thomas and the tribe deepened. They shared stories by the fire, laughed together, and faced new challenges as a united front. But one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the warriors gathered around the fire, Chief Tahoma's face grew serious. The air seemed to shift as the chief looked at Thomas with a heavy gaze. "There is something you must understand, Thomas," the chief began, his voice low and filled with weight. "The peace we have fought for is fragile. We have enemies beyond the ones we faced before. They do not forgive easily, and they will not stop." Thomas listened intently, his heart heavy with the realization that the calm they had enjoyed might not last forever. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with concern. "There are those who seek to take our land, to erase us from this place," the chief replied. "They will come again, and when they do, we must be ready." The words struck Thomas like a thunderclap. He had never imagined that their victory would only be the beginning of more conflict. He had thought, once the battle was won, that life would return to normal, but it seemed there was no end to the struggle. "What can we do?" Thomas asked, the weight of the responsibility settling over him like a heavy cloak. "We prepare," the chief said firmly. "We train, we fortify, and we wait. But we do not wait in fear. We wait in strength, in unity. And when the time comes, we stand together." Thomas nodded, his resolve hardening. He had already given so much of himself to this cause, but now, it seemed, there was more to be done. The tribe was counting on him, and the land they shared was more than just land. It was a symbol of everything they had fought for. The next few weeks were spent preparing for the unknown. The warriors trained harder, their movements sharp and focused, while Thomas helped with the construction of new defenses for the ranch. The bond between the ranch and the tribe grew even stronger, each day bringing a new sense of purpose. Thomas found himself no longer just protecting his land from the harsh conditions of the Wild West. He was now protecting a people, a culture, a way of life. But the threat was always looming, like a shadow on the horizon. Then, one morning, just as the sun began to rise, the scouts returned. The news was not good. A large force of men was gathering at the edge of their territory, and this time, they were not just looking for land. They were coming for everything. The warriors readied themselves, donning their war paint and preparing for battle. Thomas stood among them, his heart pounding, the weight of everything that had happened resting heavily on his shoulders. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a protector, a leader. As the warriors gathered, Chief Tahoma turned to Thomas, his eyes filled with respect. "Are you ready?" he asked. Thomas met his gaze, his voice steady, his heart filled with determination. "I am ready," he said. Together, they would face the coming storm, and no matter what happened, Thomas knew one thing for sure. He would stand by them, just as they had stood by him. The day had finally arrived. The warriors were gathered, their faces painted for battle, their weapons gleaming in the first light of morning. Thomas stood among them, his heart pounding in his chest, the weight of the moment heavy on his shoulders. He had never imagined that he would be standing here, not as a rancher, but as part of a force that would defend a people, a land, and a way of life. The air was tense, thick with anticipation. The wind had picked up, and the dust from the plains swirled around their feet. In the distance, the sound of horses' hooves echoed across the land. The enemy was close, and there was no turning back now. Chief Tahoma approached Thomas, his expression grim but resolute. "This is it," he said, his deep voice steady. "The battle that will determine the future of our people. But remember, we fight not with hatred, but with honor. We fight to protect what is ours, and we fight together." Thomas nodded, his jaw set in determination. He had learned much from the warriors in the weeks that had passed, how to stand firm in the face of adversity, how to fight not just with his hands, but with his heart. He was ready. As the warriors took their positions, lining up in tight formation, Thomas found his place among them. His rifle was in hand, the weight of it familiar now, a tool he had come to respect. The battle was upon them. The enemy appeared over the rise, a group of men on horseback, moving with the same aggression that had driven them from the beginning. They were led by a man Thomas had never seen before, his face hardened by years of violence and greed. As the two forces met in the open field, the clash of steel against steel rang out across the land. The warriors fought with precision, their movements fluid and calculated, while the enemy, disorganized and desperate, struggled to keep their ground. Thomas found himself in the thick of the fight, his rifle steady as he aimed at the enemy. He had never fired a gun in battle before, but his instincts kicked in, and he moved with purpose, his body working in harmony with the rhythm of the fight. The warriors were a force to be reckoned with, their discipline and unity unmatched. But as the battle raged on, Thomas saw something that made his heart race. The leader of the enemy forces, the man who had seemed so confident moments before, was now struggling. His horse had been struck, and he was thrown to the ground, vulnerable and exposed. The warriors closed in, and for a moment, Thomas hesitated. He had been raised with the belief that mercy was a virtue, but this was war. This man had come to take their land, their home, and he would not stop until he had taken everything. Chief Tahoma was the first to reach the fallen man, and without a word, he raised his weapon. But before he could strike, the enemy leader spoke. "Spare me," he gasped, his voice weak. "I was only following orders. I never wanted this." Thomas could see the desperation in his eyes, the fear of death overtaking the man who had once led with such arrogance. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Thomas looked at Chief Tahoma, who met his gaze. The chief's expression was unreadable, but there was a depth to his eyes that spoke volumes. The choice was clear: mercy or justice? After a long pause, Chief Tahoma lowered his weapon, his voice cold but firm. Go, he said. Leave this land, and never return. The enemy leader scrambled to his feet, his face pale and sweat-streaked, and without a word, he mounted his horse and fled. The warriors stood in silence, watching as the man disappeared into the distance. It was over. The battle was won. As the dust settled and the cries of victory echoed through the land, Thomas felt a surge of relief mixed with something else, something deeper. He had fought for something greater than himself, and in the end, it was not hatred that had won the day, but mercy. The warriors gathered around, their faces solemn but proud. Chief Tahoma turned to Thomas, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. You have proven yourself, Thomas, he said, not only as a warrior, but as a man of honor. You are one of us, now and always. Thomas nodded, his heart swelling with pride. He had earned his place, not through force or violence, but through his actions, his choices. As the sun set on that hard-won day, Thomas knew that his life would never be the same. He had been part of something larger than himself, and in the process, he had found a family, a purpose, and a bond that could never be broken. And though the battle had been won, the war for their land, their future, was far from over. The victory had brought a temporary peace, but it was clear that the battle for their land, for their future, was far from over. Weeks passed, and life began to return to its routine on the ranch. The warriors still remained, their presence a constant reminder of the events that had unfolded. But Thomas knew better than to believe that this peace would last forever. The land had always been a place of struggle, and he was no stranger to hardship. His days were spent working the ranch, side by side with the warriors, learning more about their ways, and strengthening the bond between them. At night, they would gather around the fire, sharing stories and songs, teaching each other about their histories. For Thomas, it was a chance to finally connect with others, to be part of something larger than himself. As the days grew warmer and the first signs of spring appeared, Thomas found himself increasingly drawn into the life of the tribe. They had become his family, and he had become a protector of their way of life. Yet, despite the peace they had achieved, there were whispers of danger still looming. It was a quiet night when the scouts returned, their faces grave. The threat had not disappeared, it had only been delayed. A new group of settlers had begun encroaching on the tribe's land, and this time, they were better equipped and more determined than ever before. The warriors gathered quickly, their training and discipline evident as they prepared for the coming conflict. Thomas stood at the edge of the camp, his heart heavy. He had hoped for a time of peace, but he knew that hope was fleeting. The chief had said it before, there would always be those who sought to take what wasn't theirs. This was the reality of their world. The warriors, led by Chief Tahoma, began to organize. They had fought before, and they would fight again. But this time, it was different. This time, they were not just defending their homes, they were defending everything they had built together. As the preparations unfolded, Thomas felt a sense of responsibility he had never known before. His connection to the tribe had deepened, and he was no longer just a man on the outskirts of their world. He was part of it. This fight, this battle, was his fight too. It wasn't just about land anymore. It was about the people he had come to love and respect, and he would do whatever it took to protect them. The day before the warriors set out to confront the settlers, Chief Tahoma called Thomas aside. The chief's face was serious, his eyes filled with a wisdom that came from years of leadership. Thomas, he said, tomorrow we fight. But remember, this fight is not just about winning. It is about preserving the honor of our people. We will not shed blood recklessly. We will fight with purpose and with respect. Our strength lies in our unity, in our hearts. Do not forget that. Thomas nodded, taking the chief's words to heart. He had seen the violence that had come before, the loss and the pain. But he also understood the importance of protecting what they had built. That night, as the wind howled outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, Thomas sat in silence. The weight of the coming battle pressed heavily on him. He wasn't just a rancher anymore. He wasn't just a man living on the edge of the wilderness. He was a part of something far greater, something that would continue long after the dust of battle had settled. The next morning, as the warriors mounted their horses and prepared to ride out, Thomas stood at the front of the camp. The air was thick with anticipation. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. The battle was coming, and there was no turning back. Chief Tahoma rode up beside him, his eyes steady and resolute. "Are you ready, Thomas?" he asked. "I am ready," Thomas replied, his voice firm. He knew what he had to do. He was ready to fight not just for himself, but for the people he had come to call his own. As the warriors rode off, their horses kicking up dust behind them, Thomas felt a surge of pride. He had found his place in this world, and no matter what the future held, he would stand by the tribe, as they had stood by him. The battle ahead would test them all, but Thomas knew one thing for certain. They would fight together, and together they would endure. The battle was fierce, more brutal than anyone had anticipated. As the warriors rode into the heart of the conflict, Thomas felt a deep sense of purpose settle in his chest. The enemies, a well-armed group of settlers, were desperate. They had come for the land, but they had not reckoned with the unity and strength of the tribe. The warriors, led by Chief Tahoma, moved with deadly precision, their attacks swift and coordinated. Thomas, though not a warrior by birth, fought with everything he had. His rifle felt like an extension of his own body, steady in his hands as he took aim and fired. The dust and smoke from the battle clouded the air, but Thomas remained focused, his mind clear. He fought not just for the land, but for the people who had welcomed him, who had made him one of their own. The sound of battle was deafening, the clash of weapons, the cries of warriors, and the thunder of hooves all blending together. Through it all, Thomas could hear Chief Tahoma's voice, steady and commanding, rallying the warriors, keeping them focused. The enemy, though numerous, lacked the discipline and unity that the tribe possessed. They were scattered, panicked, and quickly losing ground. Thomas saw one of the settlers, an older man, weathered by years of hardship, charging toward him, a knife raised in the air. The man's eyes were wild with desperation, but there was no malice in them, only fear. Thomas didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle, took aim, and fired. The man fell, the knife clattering to the ground. For a moment, Thomas felt a pang of guilt. He had taken a life, something he never thought he would do. But the reality of war, of survival, had changed him. The battle raged on, but it was clear that the tide had turned. The warriors, with their discipline and unity, were overwhelming the settlers. The fight that had begun with such intensity now seemed to be winding down, the enemy retreating in disarray. Thomas's heart was heavy, but there was no time to mourn. The chief had made it clear, victory was only half the battle. They would need to rebuild, to protect their land and their way of life. As the last of the settlers fled into the distance, Thomas stood in the center of the field, his heart racing. He looked around at the fallen warriors, his brothers in arms, and then at the survivors. The battle was won, but the cost had been high. The warriors began to regroup, their injuries tended to as best as they could manage. Chief Tahoma approached Thomas, his face stern but proud. "You fought well today," the chief said, his voice carrying a note of approval. Not as a rancher, but as a warrior. Thomas nodded, his chest swelling with pride. He had fought alongside these men, and though he had never considered himself a fighter, he had earned their respect. "We fought together," Thomas said, his voice steady. "This victory is ours, all of ours." Chief Tahoma's eyes softened slightly. "You are one of us now," he said. "You have proven yourself, not just in battle, but in heart." That night, as the warriors gathered around the fire, Thomas sat among them, his heart full. They shared stories of the battle, of the fallen, of the sacrifices made. The bond between them was stronger than ever. Thomas had found his place among them, not just as a rancher, but as a protector, a brother. And as the fire crackled in the night, Thomas realized that the journey he had begun had led him to something far greater than he had ever imagined. He had come to this land as a man alone, but now he was part of a people, part of a family that would stand by him, no matter what. The storm that had once seemed so fierce had passed, and though the road ahead was uncertain, Thomas knew one thing for sure. He would face whatever came with the strength and unity of the tribe at his side. The days following the battle were filled with a sense of both relief and renewal. The land was quiet once more, the air still, but the weight of what had been accomplished hung heavily in the air. The settlers who had tried to take their land were gone, driven away by the strength and unity of the tribe and the ranchers who had joined them. Though the warriors celebrated their victory, There was an underlying understanding among them that this peace would not last forever. They had earned this time, but it was only a moment before the next challenge would come. Thomas stood beside Chief Tahoma on a ridge overlooking the land they had fought so hard to protect. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the horizon, and the wind carried with it the scent of the earth. It was a moment of peace, but one that Thomas knew was fragile. "We have won today, Thomas," the chief said, his voice calm but firm. "But remember, it is not the victory that defines us. It is how we carry ourselves after the battle." Thomas nodded, understanding. He had learned much from the chief and the warriors, not just about battle, but about honor, respect, and what it truly meant to protect something worth fighting for. The bond between him and the tribe had only grown stronger, and he had proven to himself that he was not just a rancher. He was part of this land, part of this family. "We will rebuild," Chief Tahoma continued. "We will heal, and we will prepare for whatever comes next. But we will do so with honor, as we have always done." Over the next few weeks, life on the ranch settled into a new routine. The warriors, though still vigilant, began to focus on rebuilding the land, repairing the damages from the battle, and fortifying the defenses. Thomas worked alongside them, no longer feeling like an outsider, but like one of them, truly part of the tribe. The once quiet ranch was now a place of life and movement, a symbol of strength and unity. As time passed, Thomas realized that the land he had once viewed as nothing more than a place to work had become something much deeper. It was home now, not just because of the land itself, but because of the people who shared it with him. He had come to this place alone, a solitary rancher with nothing but his cattle and his thoughts. But now, he had a family, a purpose, and a sense of belonging that he had never known before. He knew that the challenges would continue, that life would always be uncertain in the Wild West. But he also knew that he was no longer alone. The warriors stood beside him, ready to fight for what was theirs, and he would stand with them, as he always had. One evening, as the stars began to appear in the clear night sky, Thomas sat by the fire with Chief Tahoma and the other warriors. They spoke of the future, of the children who would grow up on this land, of the generations that would follow in their footsteps. "This land is ours," the chief said, his voice filled with conviction. "But it is not just the land that makes us strong. It is our people, our spirit, and the bonds we share. As long as we stand together, nothing can take that from us." Thomas looked around at the faces of the warriors, their eyes steady and full of determination. He had seen the struggles they had faced, the battles they had fought, and the sacrifices they had made. And now, he knew, he was part of that legacy. He had helped protect something worth fighting for, and in doing so, he had found something greater than he ever could have imagined. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, Thomas felt a sense of peace wash over him. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, he felt ready to face it. With the tribe by his side, he knew that together, they could face whatever challenges came their way. The storm had passed, and though there would be more to come, Thomas was no longer afraid. He was part of something larger, something that could never be taken away. And in that, he had found his place, his purpose, and his family. In this captivating tale of survival, honor, and redemption, a simple rancher finds himself entangled in a world of warriors and ancient traditions. Set in the rugged expanse of the American West, this story takes you through a journey of unexpected alliances and hard-fought victories. As a rancher's act of kindness toward a cold and struggling native man changes his life forever, the story unfolds into a thrilling battle for land and respect. From the initial act of compassion to the fierce fight for survival, the rancher discovers what it means to truly belong. With echoes of the best Western stories, this gripping narrative highlights the unbreakable bond between people who fight for their land, their families, and their future. The rich cultural elements and the fierce loyalty between the tribe and the rancher are explored in vivid detail, making this one of the most engaging Western stories you'll ever experience. Amidst the chaos of battle and the quiet moments by the fire, the rancher learns that his journey is far from over. In true Western stories fashion, the story doesn't just end with the battle. It continues with the promise of more challenges, more growth, and more courage. This is a tale of redemption, of finding one's place in the world, and of standing together to protect what matters most. The warrior's fierce spirit and the rancher's newfound purpose come together in this unforgettable tale, making it a must-read for anyone who loves epic Western stories. Prepare for a journey filled with action, emotion, and the timeless themes that define the best Western stories, as one man's kindness leads to a legacy that will last forever.